Just a brief word of introduction for my colleagues here on the panel. To my far right, Admiral Denny McGinn, Chairman, President of the American Council on Renewable Energy, veteran of 34 years in the U.S. Navy, aviator, commanding carriers at sea, retired and took on even a larger challenge to see if we can develop a greater awareness about the relationship between climate, energy, and security in our country. Appreciate your joining us today, Admiral.
Yes, sir.
Jeff Harris. There was a time in Jeff's life when nobody was allowed to know that he existed.
That's true.
He ran the National Reconnaissance Office, which has been thoroughly leaked for the past 10 or 15 years. It's responsible for the most sensitive intelligence collection technologies in our country and truly a phenomenal center of science, technology, intelligence, the underpinnings of victory in the Cold War and brilliance in its leadership. Jeff personifies. Appreciate your being here today, Jeff.
Thanks.
Jim Woolsey needs no introduction. Ubiquitous in the Wall Street Journal for good reason. Director of Central Intelligence, co-author with me occasionally, and a leading contributor to our national debate on the national security risks we're running by our exposure to a single fuel to drive 97% of all the air, sea, land transportation in our country. Senator Bennett Johnston, Chairman, during 24 years in the United States Senate from Louisiana, Chairman of the Energy, Natural Resources Committee, important as the driving author of the Energy Policy Act, energy reform measures from deregulation of natural gas, the licensing processes for nuclear power, and tackling the myriad of problems facing our electricity power generation industry in this country. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
On my left, unusual for him to be the left of anybody, former Secretary of the Air Force, Jim Roche, also a veteran of distinguished naval career, and had the good fortune to work under the tutelage of former Senator Henry Scoop Jackson. A good friend of mine taught me all I know about working in the U.S. Senate, the Armed Services Committee, and as Secretary of the Air Force was then followed a career with Northrop Grumman, preceded by a career with Northrop Grumman. As knowledgeable a figure as you'll ever want to find about energy, national security. Appreciate you being here, Jim.
Thank you, sir.
Ambassador Boyden Gray, counsel to the first senior President Bush in the White House, and for years, a fanatic on the sins of major players in the energy industry, raised our awareness about subsidies, as well as esoteric measures like aromatics, things that can do harm to you. A leading contributor to the Energy Policy Act. Appreciate your being here today, Boyden. And our moderator today, Ann Coren, co-founder and co-director of the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security, and kind of the brains behind everybody on the panel here when it comes to real knowledge about national security, energy, climate, technology. When Ann talks, all of our mouths move. Take it away, Ann.
Thank you, Bud, and thank you all for being here, and all of you. There's really no need to reiterate the importance of oil to our national security, to our economic security, the importance of stable oil prices, the importance of a secure supply of energy. As we're moving towards an election, as we see gas prices being cited as a major factor in exit polls, the politics around this issue are going to become more and more and more vibrant, and that provides challenges and opportunities. Challenges to get anything done in this session, but opportunities to focus the minds of policymakers on the profound risks that we face and the types of policies that could make a difference, and frankly, the types of policies that could do harm. We have a great deal of concern in the news among the general public about what's going on in the Persian Gulf, not just with respect to oil prices, but in general. Are we moving towards another war? What's the situation there? We have a terrific panel here, and let's start tackling these issues right away. This is going to be a free-flowing conversation. So, Jeff, let's start with you. You know, you've been thinking about all of these security issues from 20,000 leagues over the sea for decades. Looking at the Persian Gulf, what is your assessment of a disruptive situation there? What's the risk that we are going to see another war in the Gulf in the near term?
Wars are fought over scarcity, and we have sort of two ends of the scale. We're going to fight wars over water, we're going to fight wars over energy, because they both contribute so much to the quality of life. When we were all awakened to terrorism, we were reminded in a conference that the one thing that all people care about is their kids and their grandkids. And if you imagine simultaneously 50 school buses being hijacked and kids being put at risk, how it would stop the heartbeat of any civilized society as that would take place. So if you look at the availability of clean water, the availability and affordability of fuel to make us, as a world, as a nation, economically viable, it is the stuff that causes wars, because you create a system of have and have-nots. And so what happens here is a particular advantage under a set of conditions. In this case, nations are trying to move themselves away from an oil standard in order to have options. And options are exactly what the definition gives you: alternatives. And it's the bright line where you don't have alternatives that then creates a forcing function. So I think it's as Tom Clancy would say, a clear and present danger.
A clear and present danger, and with Iran kind of looming on the horizon, what's going to happen with Iran? Jim, this has an impact on our defense establishment, on our ability of our military to complete its tasks when oil prices spike because of concern.
Oh, there are a couple of points. You raised the Persian Gulf and Straits of Hormuz, which is very hard to shut down, by the way. Analysis done of it says you can put some mines there, but the naval ships just care where the mines are not. You clear a path and you go through. Still, it's disruptive. And you may remember back in a number of years ago when we were reflagging merchant ships in order to give them some protection. And it was because there were threats from the Revolutionary Guards coming to sea. Iran was deterred at that point by our attack on Libya. And right after that, they didn't misbehave as much. So the Iranians may be deterrable, but clearly a major conflict in that part of the world would cause such disruptions to the energy supplies of the world. And since oil is fungible, everyone will get hit. We did well, and Bud was part of it, to create the SPO. And the SPO was not meant to adjust for small price changes. It was meant to make sure that the people in the Middle East understood that if there was a real problem, we could cut them off and we could go for a while. The national security implications are that it's far away. The president's trying to lower the amount of money going to defense. He wants to worry about the Pacific. And you don't start to say a lot and take on new commitments at the same time you're cutting your forces by close to half.
Denny, as a Navy guy, let's get some Navy Air Force.
Oh, but he's a pilot, so it's okay.
Oh, yes. Well, then it raises the question of who the better pilots are, the Navy or the Air Force pilots, right? Well, we don't really want to go there. I think landing on a carrier is probably the most difficult thing a pilot could do. No?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, you know, Denny, when we think about the Straits of Hormuz, when we think about ensuring a secure flow of energy, despite what any nation in the region might want to disrupt, that entails a very significant projection of force on our part. And at a time when our forces are already in the area and we're trying to pull some of them back, and our military is really very, very extended, the concern over the ability of disruptive forces in the Gulf to cause spikes in oil price and really bring our economy to its knees is very profound.
Let me start with a point that Bud made right up front, and that is that our energy security, our environmental security, our economic security, and our national security are all inextricably linked. And so disruptions or challenges to any one of those aspects of our security affects the others. Just flip that around. Our solutions to dealing with that set of interlinked challenges must take into consideration the consequences in the other areas. So right now, the nation's attention is focused on the price of gas at the pump. I want to say, by the way, I can give you $2.50 gasoline if we continue business as usual in 10 years. It'll be $2.50 a liter. Because we are overly reliant on gasoline and petroleum-based products to fuel our transportation infrastructure at sea, in the air, and on land. It's gotten better, partly because of the recession, partly because of the introduction of a little bit of electrification of the automobile force, if you will, and mostly because of the imposition of CAFE standards, which are going to make a huge difference between now and 2025 especially. But what we really need to do is to create alternatives, a better, more balanced, more secure, homegrown portfolio of transportation energy. I think that's what the key role that methanol can play, among other aspects of our energy demand. And it has to be done in partnership with the other ways of increasing this portfolio. We've got to be real careful that we don't say, all right, the answer to all of these challenges is methanol. It isn't. It's part of the answer, and a big part. But it's ethanol as well. It's electrification. It's taking a balanced approach and really taking a look at the costs, benefits, and risks of every element of that energy portfolio and asking ourselves the question, does this make us more secure? Does it make us more prosperous? Does it put us more in control of our energy future so we don't have to worry that tomorrow the Iranian Republican Guards are going to shut down the Straits of Hormuz only for a matter of weeks or months, but that would have reverberating effects, as Jim Roach just said, through our economy, globally and nationally. We would start looking at gas probably at the low end, $150 a barrel, or petroleum, and perhaps edging up north of that towards 200. It would make the 2008 recession look like the good old days.
Jim, you know, Denny's talking about something very important here, which is competition in the transportation fuel sector. I think it's critical for people to understand where the importance of oil comes from, and people understand intuitively it's transportation, but there are a lot of misconceptions about transportation, oil, what the problem we're facing actually is.
Well, that's absolutely right. First of all, I really agree with Denny. We've got to stop forming when we're opposed to using oil as much as we possibly can be in transportation. We've got to stop forming our firing squads in a circle. There's been far too much backing and forthing of electricity versus ethanol versus methanol, and that's over. We need to work together, the way Denny said. We've got several problems coming from oil. First of all, in the U.S., we borrow $1 billion a day to pay for foreign oil. That is more than $1,000 added tax per American per year. But that tax is not paid to our own government, where it might pay for Social Security or the Naval Academy or some useful things. It's paid to the governments of Saudi Arabia and Iran and the rest. It is fundamentally nuts that we are spending that kind of money when we have had some of the types of improvements and changes that we've seen, both in biofuels and in the price of natural gas, making possible methanol. Natural gas is now roughly an order of magnitude below oil in cost per equal unit of energy. They used to track one another for years. They tracked one another. $1 of million BTUs of natural gas, about $6 a barrel oil. They don't track each other anymore. Oil is up way over $100 a barrel now, especially for the Brent. So to presume that we're still in that world where oil and gas were roughly equal cripples our abilities to do something about some of the terrible problems we have. And let me just name one that Boyden Gray and I have talked about. Boyden kind of started all this with a fine article he and a colleague wrote 3 or 4 years ago. But EPA has never noticed or done anything about the fact that when we got the lead out in 1970s to get rid of the cancer-causing substance that was in all of our gasoline tanks, they permitted the oil companies to substitute the aromatics, benzene, toluene, xylene, which are also carcinogenic. You know that sweet smell you smell when you're pumping gasoline at the station? That's the smell of cancer. That's over $100 billion a year, Boyden will tell you, in costs, medical costs, and tens of thousands of early deaths per year, because EPA refuses to let us take advantage of alcohol fuels, ethanol or methanol, in order to get octane up. You've got to get the octane up or the engines will knock. So we are ignoring some huge, huge costs of petroleum-based fuels. That one of over $100 billion a year is an example. And in order to do something about the national security issues that have been raised here, about the medical issues, about borrowing $1 billion a day as a country in order to import oil, we have got to have competition at the pump. We have got to be able to purchase not only gasoline but ethanol or methanol at the pump and move quickly to be able to do that. Anything less than that, whether EPA is willing to encourage it or not, is a real dereliction of duty on all of our parts.
Bud, you know, we've heard a lot today about the economics of natural gas, the economics of making methanol from natural gas, the different opportunities that are out there to really open the transportation fuel sector to competition. What are the most important things we need to do, and in your view, the reasons we need to do them?
That's a terrific question, Ann. I think all of us have lived with a worry about what could cause the price of oil to go up. Disruption has usually been a leading worry, or just an arbitrary, whimsical raising of the price has occurred in 1973, but when the cartel raised the price of oil. There's something new, however, and that is that simple quasi-market forces could put us at $200 a barrel. Indeed, a member of our council, John Hofmeister, former president of Shell, makes a very persuasive case that the run-up in demand in China from 9 million barrels a day today to 15 by 2014, corresponding increase in demand in India from 6 million a day to 10 million a day in 2014. That's a net increase globally, just from those two countries, of 10 million additional new barrels a day of demand in the next 2 years' time. Well, you may say, well, Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and others can just pump more. The fact is, in the past 5 to 10 years, the OPEC countries and other state-owned industries have not been ramping up capacity, refining as well as just E&P and production. As a consequence, nobody in the industry that I've heard of can tell you where that additional 10 million barrels a day is going to come from. So simple upward pressure on price from demand outstripping supply could put oil, according to John Hofmeister, up $200 a barrel without any disruption, without any capricious increase in the price of oil as a policy matter. Well, the good news, and what my colleagues have already said, is that there are ways we can avoid this, and they boil down to introducing competition at the pump. There is in both houses right now, there are bills that would do essentially what Brazil has done, and that is to require competition by making the cars able to warranty an alternative means of powering the vehicle. It's indifferent, agnostic about who wins. It's not dictating a winner. However, right now, those bills sitting there, Senator Cantwell, Senator Lugar introduced the one in the Senate, and corresponding couple of dozen co-sponsors in the House. But I would really welcome, Senator Johnston, your judgment about what it's going to take to get something like this done.
Well, let me say the remarkable thing about methanol are its qualities. First, it is cheaper than gasoline. Even if made out of natural gas, even at $8 an MCF, cheaper than gasoline. Secondly, you don't have to invent any new processes to make methanol. I'm involved right now in a project in Lake Charles, Louisiana, in a big plant that will make methanol, a huge plant. We know the cost, well-established technology. Third, to have methanol in competition as a fuel or as a transportation fuel does not take a subsidy. It is, I think, unique upon alternative fuels being cheaper. It doesn't take a subsidy. So you think, America, what's wrong? Why aren't we doing this? Well, as the members up here of the council have been saying, we don't know, but we ought to get on with it. Do you know that the Chinese, wouldn't you know, are way ahead of us on this? They have a big experiment going, a big program going in China where they have over 35,000 cars being fueled by different kinds of methanol, M10 through M100, and they're testing it to determine what is the most efficient, what is the best way to configure the car to have the least pollutants, and all of those things which it takes to standardize and certify the fuels. Now, in America, we did this with a DOE program from the 1980s. But unfortunately, and it was a successful program. They didn't complete the program, but it was very successful. They were learning what they needed to learn. But along comes the price of crude oil. If you can remember, it really fell below $10 a barrel. It's not going to be there again, don't worry. But it fell below $10 a barrel, so people said, what's the point in trying to compete with gasoline at those kind of prices? So what we ought to do, in addition to passing this other legislation, is begin immediately to start certifying, testing, work with the Chinese to accommodate that wonderful set of knowledge which they have. Go back and look at what DOE did in the 1980s, because you need certifications and standards. You know, in order for Detroit to give you an engine warranty, you have to have a certified fuel. You just can't come in with whatever fuel you want. You have to have testing and certification for that. We ought to be doing that right now, along with legislation, because methanol, you know, somebody said it's not the solution. Maybe not, but there's nothing else like natural gas and coal in the United States. Huge sources that I won't say they're limitless, but they are huge and they are at low price. And by the way, you can sequester the carbon, which we're doing at our plant in Lake Charles. We're sequestering 90% of the carbon, using it for, as a matter of fact, for enhanced oil recovery, so that you get a double bang for the buck. You get your methanol and you re-inject the CO2 in the oil fields, which have at least 40% of the oil left there available to get. I mean, it's such a win-win. America, it's time to wake up to the opportunities we have and get on with pursuing them.
Now, Boyden, you were at the White House when President H.W. Bush talked about methanol. And there was a lot of hope at that point. And I believe you were the architect of really getting the White House to think about this even. How did you do that? And what do you think needs to happen now for us to get the same sort of momentum really at the level of top leadership?
Well, it is true. We spent a lot of time on methanol back in those days. I even had a methanol car, some of you may know here, which I used to get me out of a death strike from the Washington Post. They were going to do a style section piece on me to destroy me. And I went to our press secretary, Marlon Fitzwater, and said, what do I do? And he said, Boyden, there's nothing we can do to help you. He's out to get you, and he may succeed, and just let the chips fall where they may, but you can, he said, you can try to play the eccentricity card. So I said, all right, the eccentricity card, what will that be? So I gave the reporter a ride along the Washington Parkway in my methanol car, which had one of the things that you don't mention as an attribute of methanol, is a very high heat of vaporization. So it has enormous power when it does vaporize. And we got up to over 100. I admitted that statute of limitations is long since running. And he opened up the story, and the whole front page was vroom, vroom, vroom about his ride on the Parkway, and he didn't get to the bad stuff until the inside page, and I was saved. So I feel as though I owe my life to methanol. And we had a proposal for 1 million methanol cars on the roads. Of course, the oil industry objected wildly, big fights from the Department of Energy, and that became a performance standard. All right, if you can reduce in the ordinary fuel the pollution that is relieved by having 1 million methanol cars, then you can avoid the methanol car, and that's the origin of reformulated gasoline, which has been a huge success, but all kind of taken for granted now and forgotten. What do we need to do now? And I think the problem is at EPA. You saw the slideshow earlier. This is methanol, ethanol, natural gas, electricity. They're all good to get rid of the air toxics. You saw that little, but EPA won't do anything about the air toxics, and
Jim Woolsey has just explained to you that they won't do anything. Why won't they do anything? Well, there are lots of theories, and we can talk afterwards. I don't want to take up time, but they just won't do it. And they're thereby depriving you and all of the competition to gasoline of one of your strongest attributes, which is you are clean. And you don't foul the air, and you don't kill people. And you should be able to capitalize on that as a competitor. Point one. Point two. There actually is a statute. There actually is a statute that does establish an open fuel standard. I don't want to undercut your current legislation, but there already is legislation. It's called the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act. Sound pretty good? Energy Independence and Security Act. That sets up, Denny, the CAFE standards. In that statute, in great detail, are a set of incentives, for alternative fuels, just like methanol, which is mentioned, ethanol, natural gas, and there's a thing called the 0.15 multiplier. Let me ask, how many people here have ever heard of this obscure thing? I see about 3 hands. It's actually a divisor. You divide it into the miles per gallon of your non-petroleum fuel, because the purpose of the statute is to reduce petroleum usage, and out comes the car mileage for that car. So if you had a methanol car that got 30 miles to the gallon, which may be a little high because of the BTU content, you divide by 0.15, and guess what? It goes into the fuel average as a 200 mile per hour car.
Per gallon.
Per gallon. Now,
Unless he's driving it.
200 miles per gallon. Now, it doesn't take too many 200 miles per gallon cars in your fleet that you're selling to get a huge multi-billion-dollar benefit from selling such a car. If Ford, for example, which has the largest number of fleet sales, sold only half of their fleet sales as alternatively fueled vehicles, whether they're methanol or compressed gas or whatever, they would reduce the mileage requirement for the rest of their fleet by 6 miles per gallon, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar incentive. There's only one small catch to this wonderful world of open fuel standards encouraging you guys and other competitors to oil. You know what the problem is?
What's the problem?
EPA has repealed the statute unilaterally by itself. And so you've got to go to EPA. Now, how can EPA repeal a federal statute? Well, I don't think they can. But they're in the process of doing it. Now, it isn't final yet. They may recant, they may back off and leave these incentives in place, but they are, at the moment, intending to take them out. And so we have to stop that. And if we can stop that, then you will have a huge opening. Is there a way to challenge this? Well, the car companies agreed with the Obama administration not to challenge any of these rules. Don't ask me to explain why that is. That's a long story outside another conference. But that's what happened. And so, and I don't know whether any of you has standing, that's a legal term, to raise this in court if EPA doesn't do it correctly. But I think some of you should think about the standing question, think about challenging this rule if EPA doesn't fix it, because you already have an open fuel standard which EPA is trying to take away.
Thank you, Boyden. Down the rabbit hole we go. Now, Jim.
I just wanted to add both to Boyden and to Senator Johnston's points. There is a market that will obtain, and there are bureaucratic ways of screwing up the market, delaying it, et cetera. And you need to bifurcate them. One of the reasons the Chinese are so interested in methanol is they have access to the southern part of China, to the largest reserves of natural gas in the world. It's huge. It covers many, many countries, and if they could ever tap into it, they will help drive down the price of oil just by shifting it themselves. If we all do, we may get to the point where the Middle East countries drive around on oil, and they're the only ones who do, or we'll be able to make use of methanol, domestic oil, et cetera. I think the point that both Jim and others have raised is it's not the government's role to choose one of those, but it is the government's role to not put obstacles in the way of a market trying to do what it should do. I mean, why did the Japanese build little cars that got terrific gas mileage? Because every drop of oil that got to Japan had to come in by ship. They did that. They also led the world in taking things like refrigerators and making them dramatically more efficient after 1973, so that the amount of energy consumed by a modern refrigerator is dramatically less, to the point where people who keep old refrigerators for beer are spending an awful lot of money to chill their beer. You're better off getting a new refrigerator. That's the market forces working. And I think the Chinese will work hard on methanol-related things, so they have access to it. And I think we could work on the portfolio, the point that was raised earlier by Denny. There are certain places where it appears something like a methanol-ethanol operation works fine. We already know it works great in city buses. There are other high-torque vehicles that don't go at high speeds where it would work very well. But the market will also want to be able to have other things work. And I think hybrids will bring a lot to us. Maybe hybrid diesel, maybe hybrid methanol, maybe hybrid whatever. But we will find ways, as long as the government doesn't get in the way, either by choosing ahead of time when it shouldn't, or in Jim's point about not dealing with things that it ought to deal with. We face a government on either party that just wants to get into our daily lives more than it should, and it should do what the founders wanted it to do.
Instead of picking winners, open the market to competition. Make sure the market is open to competition. Senator Johnston.
Yes, I want to talk about these standards. Boyden is right about the open fuel standard, which is really a CAFE standard. Now, there's another set of standards having to do with additives. The Chinese report that there's some 400 different additives that you can use which will affect the efficiency as well as the emissions of the car. Also, we need to experiment with what is the most, the best kind of fuel. Is it M15? Is it M85? All of those things make a lot of difference, because if you have an M15 car, it can also use gasoline. If you have an M85, it probably cannot use gasoline. So a lot of these things need to be looked at as an experiment, as the Chinese are doing. So we really need to get with the Chinese and have a national program that certifies what is the best fuel. Will it pass muster with the warranty of Detroit? Because you know, right now on E15, the industry wants very much to use E15, ethanol 15%, but Detroit says that they would, the warranty would not apply if you used E15, as much as we know about ethanol. So we need to get the answers to those kinds of questions, and we need to start to do it right away.
Now, Bud, when you look at all these issues that have been raised, and you think about how do we move forward from here? How do we move forward from here so that this country can take advantage of the vast natural gas, biomass, coal, CO2 resources that we have? Then you really run into the issue of fundamentally what problem are we trying to solve? What problem are we trying to solve? This isn't just or even fundamentally about reducing imports, right? This is about reducing the strategic importance of oil. That's why all of these resources are important. That's why all this competition is important.
Well, you're right, Ann. Indeed, we will never have a better set of circumstances to get ourselves off the vulnerability of a single fuel than we do right now. On the one end is price. Over $4 a gallon at your pump is one incentive, certainly. You wish you had a $3 equivalent methanol available to you, so that's an incentive. But then, of course, in addition to that $4 gasoline, all of us are conscious of the defense budget, and at least a third of it, by most measures, is attributed to keeping the sea lines of communication open, or in preserving a secure Persian Gulf region. If you think about just the actual cash that we send overseas every year, as Jim said, $1 billion a day, which is borrowed. What could you do with $1 billion a day if you didn't borrow it, but you had that disposable income available for Americans to use in launching small enterprises? What would we experience in the way of change if that $400 billion weren't going overseas and being recycled toward influencing American policy. Nobody has gotten into, and it's not the point of this conference, to wonder how many people on K Street are funded in the Persian Gulf. And what is the impact of that on everything from tax policy to energy policy to national security policy? And of course, there is the loss of life. My gosh, all of us are concerned about our servicemen and women and the sacrifices they are making. Seldom do we ever hear, however, that they are there in large measure because of our vulnerabilities and our reliance upon a single petroleum-based fuel. So, all in all, you've got environment, national security, economics, influence on our policy, all of these powerful vulnerabilities that we're facing have come to a crescendo right now. We happen, by the way, to be in an election year. What better time for an aspiring president or an incumbent to come out finally with an energy policy? It would be novel, for sure.
Jim, Jeff, Danny, I know you're all itching to jump in here, so why don't we just go down the line?
We haven't said enough bad about oil yet. And I just wanted to add one other little problem that it helps create. Let's put it this way. I knew slightly the late Abdul Rahman Wahid Gusdur, the former president of Indonesia. I spent several evenings with him. A remarkable man, heading it was hard to be more in favor of religious liberty than Gusdur unless you're Thomas Jefferson. I mean, he was an amazing figure, and his branch of Islam in Indonesia and some in other parts of the world are also in an open and generous stance with respect to other religions. But that is not the stance that comes out of the Arabian desert. And Lawrence Wright, in his fine book, The Looming Tower, about al-Qaeda, says that with between 1 and 2% of the world's Muslims, the Saudis control about 90% of the world's Islamic institutions, including schools. So if you wonder who's paying for these little 8- and 9-year-old boys to be taught to have their greatest dream to be a suicide bomber, try the following. Next time you're pulling into a filling station, before you get out to take out your billfold or purse and get your credit card out, ask, I wonder who's paying for those little boys to be taught that stuff. Then, before you get out of the car, turn the rearview mirror a couple of inches so you're looking into your own eyes. Now you know. Now you know who's paying for it. Welcome to the club.
Jeff.
Following the thought on managing scarcity, as a systems engineer, you like to have a problem that you can get your arms around, several knobs that you can turn the knob to try and put them into balance. The scarcity thought, if you go on the web this week, Marmite, the close cousin to Vegemite, the factory was hurt in the New Zealand earthquake, and you can now find a single jar on the auction site for $2,900. So here is an unedible food that is in demand by someone, sort of forcing the marketplace up. So as a system engineer, you look at a solution space, you look at people, you look at process, you look at technology, and you try and get those into balance. Here we have an imperative for the environment, which appeals very strongly for the 20-somethings who want a very different planet than the one we have given to them. We have an economic incentive along the lines that Jim Woolsey just spoke to, as to never before have we had the exchange of national wealth like we're exhibiting right now. And we have a imperative for national security in order to get this right, so that our elected democracy can have the tools and the treasure in order to go do what's right. So as a technologist, you sort of say, what do I have to invent to go make this problem go away? As we've discussed this morning, we have the available technology to go do that. Now, if I come to Washington and we start a technical discussion, you have to boil it down to a single proximate issue, because the rules of consensus says you can't make it complicated. So here, as we bring together the consensus around alternative fuels, we have to make sure that we get on message that we're not picking a single winner here. We're picking a single loser. And the single loser is to get to a set of alternatives when today we have no alternative. And if you say you can't change quickly, I was talking to a friend of mine who was an executive at Eastman Kodak, and he said, you know, we saw the digital coming. We just couldn't believe it could happen so quickly. We've taken the US electrical grid in a single decade off an oil-based standard. And so when you switch the light, it's now different than it was 10 years ago. And we sat here this morning admiring different aspects of the problem, some of it bureaucratic, but very little of it technical, a lot of it about leadership that we've spoken to. But if you can get the ingredients together, this is, as a system engineer, a classic, build it, they will come, because we have all of the vectors pointing to the need for a substantial change, and a substantial change quickly. But back to many of the comments that we've had, it doesn't have to be in a single step, because there's a crawl, walk, run here that allows us to move, in the case of this conference, to some alcohol-based fuels that allow us to leverage the experience that we're getting from our China and Brazil experience.
Jeff, before I jump to Denny, I just really want to highlight 2 points that you raised. One is our grid is fuel agnostic. There's no reason our cars shouldn't be fuel agnostic.
Right.
And the other, you know, that Marmite, I think that is absolutely a wonderful comparison. I say we want to turn oil into salt, but you could just as well say we want to turn oil into Marmite. Right. Because what happens is Marmite ran out. You can use Vegemite. Right. You can use Nutella. You can put peanut butter on your toast.
They can't, not if you're New Zealand. Thanks to Mark.
Unless you're really picky. But you'll get the same nutrition, you know, and you can't do that with your car today, and you ought to be able to. Danny?
So maybe we can fuel our cars with ethanol and methanol and other fuel choices and lubricate the wheels with Marmite. Might be a way to go. I just want to comment on something that Bud McFarland said a while ago, and that is the conditions are right. We have all of the factors, dynamics, if you will, politically and socially and economically for change. But there's a tremendous, powerful inertia. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. Business as usual is very, very comfortable. And there are a lot of vested interests in there, people who are somewhere in the value chain of transportation energy that like things just the way they are. So out on the campaign trail, you hear this crazy stuff that we can be self-sufficient, energy independent, just because we've got this wonderful horizontal drilling and fracking and all of this business. Don't for a minute believe that that is a sustainable way to go for the future, because we will rue the day that we were complacent enough and so comfortable with the business as usual that we find ourselves in 5 or 10 years with our back against the wall, and those options simply aren't available. So when you hear the folks that are the single product advocates for transportation energy telling you that the only thing standing between us and energy nirvana is the Department of the Interior or EPA or whatever, not the case. Of course, I'm accepting my colleagues' points about EPA bureaucracy standing in the way of getting off of BTX and an open fuel standard. I want to make one other point. The United States is the only developed country in the world where we are having a discussion about climate change. And it's because of wacky science that's out there. It's because of talk radio and all of these very, very polarized political groups that just don't want to think about another way of doing business. Because the underlying psychology is that somehow that's going to hurt our economy, lower our standard of living, affect our quality of life. And it's really ironic because actually the opposite is true. By embracing choice at the pump, by increasing our portfolio of energy choices for both transportation and electricity, we create better economy, higher quality of life, and we just need to, as a population of voters, understand that if you hear in the bumper stickers out there that this is the way to go, it isn't. It's simply another form of business as usual. Now is the time that we can change, and we can change in a way that benefits our economy and most definitely benefits our security and prosperity.
Boyden, I know. Well, you want to clap?
Thank you,
clap.
dear.
Go ahead. Did you want to jump in?
Well, what I would say, I just would just qualify what Denny just said, just with one anecdote. The Secretary of Energy in the Reagan second term was a guy named John Harrington, and the head of EPA was a guy named Lee Thomas, and John Harrington is going over a staff meeting. Who was coming in to see me at 2 o'clock? And a voice from the staff said, well, that's X, Y, and Z coming in to ask you if you will ask Lee Thomas for X, Y, and Z. And he threw up his hands and his papers went all over the place, and he said, how come everybody comes in to lobby me to lobby Lee Thomas? How come no one ever comes in to lobby me to lobby me? And the little voice in the room said, because Lee Thomas has all the power. So, look, I love EPA. It's the most able agency in this country domestically, but they have supported a monopoly for gasoline for a long, long time. Monopolies just don't exist by themselves. They have to have some form of government support, and I would suggest that what Jim and I have said about where to go, you cannot ignore EPA. You can talk about national security all you want, but the fuel that goes into your tank is controlled by EPA.
Now, Bud, we have just a few minutes to go, so why don't you wrap up for us, and then as the moderator, I'll have the last word.
I think it's all been said this morning with an excellent panel and by my colleagues here already today. I think Gary Hart, a member of our panel, encapsulated it as well as anybody ever has in a panel I shared with him about a year and a half ago. And it's a college audience, and at the end of he and I giving our pitch, the Q&A session, a young woman said, Senator Hart, why cannot our country develop an energy policy? He said, well, you're wrong about that. We do have an energy policy. We rely on a single fuel. It's priced by a cartel. And every few years, we go to war to maintain that privilege. Well, if it weren't essentially true, it would be laughable. Our country, as great as it is, has an opportunity to tackle an economic problem, a giant problem. $200 a barrel oil will bring our economy down and all the other economies in the world. And it is going to happen within 2 years. That's not me talking, that's the oil industry telling us that. Transferring that amount of wealth overseas is wealth that our central problem of this election, which is fiscal and debt issues, are worsened by shipping that much money overseas every year. Even if part of it didn't go to Al-Qaeda, which it does, or come back here through sovereign wealth funds that begin to buy American companies. I mean, there is no end of problems that can be traced to our having a single transportation fuel. national security, economic, environmental, and the loss of a lot of lives. We can do this.
Thank you, Bud. Look, fundamentally, as my colleague Gal pointed out earlier today, we're facing an energy security paradox. It's not enough to just either reduce the amount of oil we consume through efficiency, though efficiency is very important. It's not enough to simply increase the amount of oil that we can supply through expanded domestic or non-OPEC production, though expanded production is certainly important. Because at the end of the day, when all we focus on is reducing imports, the price goes up, and in the net, not just per barrel, but in the net, we end up spending even more. But where there's a problem, there's also a solution. And in this case, if you look at opening the transportation fuel market to competition, because the transportation fuel market is the source of oil's importance to the global economy. The transportation fuel market is the reason that oil is the lifeblood of the global economy. And you understand that there are broad industries across this country and the world that have an opportunity to play a role in the transportation fuel market, and that includes the oil industry itself, because the oil industry is, of course, the oil and the gas industry. We need to make sure that our cars, our platforms on which fuels can compete, doesn't really matter what fuels. Let the market figure out what fuels. We're here at the Methanol Policy Conference. You've heard earlier today, and you'll hear later on, the tremendous economic opportunity that methanol poses. But I want everybody to keep in mind, this isn't just about the parochial interest of any one industry or another. This is about ensuring the safety and security and stability of not just the US economy, but that of the entire world. And if we do not knock oil off of its pedestal as a strategic commodity and to make it just another commodity, something that's useful for a range of purposes, but isn't just that important anymore, isn't worth going to war over, then woe be us. Thank you very much to our wonderful panel, to the United States Energy Security Council members that have really dedicated so much energy and intelligence and hard work to just getting these ideas out there and really evangelizing this issue to as broad a set of ears as are willing to hear it.